humanists of our time. The modern, unbelieving secularists and humanists of our time. Is the great danger to freedom and good government.
People who reject the very word of God, people who reject the very word of God, people who reject the very word of God.
Welcome to Freethinking 101, brought to you by the Rationalist Society of St. Louis. I'm Barbara Stocker. Tonight our guest is Pat Inniss. Previously, Pat and I discussed the New Testament. Tonight, our topic will be the Old Testament. Pat, the Old Testament can be said to be characterized by violence and cruelty, seasoned with sexism, xenophobia, and greed, and what today we would consider psychotic delusions. Why then is it so popular?
Well, you know, Barbara, that's really why it is popular. You know, these elements that are so abundant in the Old Testament are really the same ones that are employed by old and modern storytellers to grab the audience's attention and provide them with that extra, you know, jolt of adrenaline when they hear these violent stories. Folklore, you know, storytellers, they always tend to exaggerate the lurid and violent aspects of any story at the expense of the more mundane and really in human terms perhaps the more important aspects of the story. But the violent aspects are really the ones that seem to get people's attention. It happens even in modern literature, modern popular literature. If you compare that with some of the Bible stories, there's very strong parallels. The story of, you know, mythology and heroes, it's really very common throughout cultures and across the ages. I guess the best example of that recently has been in some of the movies that have been made, say, by Spielberg, Lucas, like Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they revisited certain religious themes and borrowed heavily from that type of story to frame their narrative.
Okay, but doesn't the violent content take a lot of the fun out of it? I mean, it seems like it would be even better to read the part about the talking and burning bushes and fiery chariots and the seas being parted without all the deceptions and rape and murder and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. For us, that would be true, perhaps, that we would like to you could maybe plow in a lot of special effects into the story that didn't necessarily hurt anybody, and that would make a pretty good story. But the thing is that these stories really reflect the attitudes, the values, mores of the society in which they were written, in which they were formed. And at the time, these people didn't really share the values that we have now. They viewed themselves much differently. You could say, I guess, in a sense, that life was cheap. And these people didn't think of themselves as being impressionable in the same way as we do when we read the Bible and read about all the violence and depravity that's contained in there. You say, gee, I don't want my kids to get a hold of this. But they didn't really, apparently they didn't look at it that way. And apparently a lot of people still don't look at it that way.
Like violent television and movies and so forth. Okay, well, the evil that you find in the Bible is presented as reflecting the dark nature of man as conceived in the Judeo-Christian tradition. This doesn't really give us ammunition to attack the corresponding concept of God, does it?
Well, the way it's presented in the Bible, although in the Christian concept, the Judeo-Christian concept, man is basically fallen and evil. A lot of the most violent incidents in the Bible are actually instigated by God. So they do paint the picture of a very, very violent, very vengeful God. I guess some of the examples, well, that's really where you really have the fun, you know, is really reading the Bible, you know, if you can call it the fun. If you really believe the stuff actually happened, maybe it's not much fun. But if you read it as mythology, then you can sort of be lightly entertained by the stories that are told in the Bible. The plagues were visited upon Egypt by God as punishment to the Pharaoh. An excellent example. These were all God's works. He turned the waters into blood. All the water fish died. The rivers stank. This is something that, you know, the Lord did to Moses, to Egypt, because Pharaoh wouldn't release Moses. Now, Pharaoh had his magicians too. This is an interesting thing. His magicians were able to recreate the same miracles that were performed by the Lord. So they, you know, you might wonder why the Pharaoh would have his magicians sort of duplicate these terrible plagues which were being which were being inflicted on them. But, you know, after each one, the magician said, "Oh, I can do that too." So they went on. They had the plague of lice. That's one of my favorite. Thomas Paine called that a lousy victory. And this went on and on. The pharaohs were able, the magicians were able to duplicate it. But the interesting thing here is that throughout this succession of plagues, apparently Pharaoh was at times touched, and, you know, he was ready to say uncle, but then they say the Lord hardened his heart. So we had to go to yet another plague. And apparently many innocent people suffered as a result of this, because the Lord kept hardening Pharaoh's heart. The violence that you find in the Bible is quite extreme. And one of my favorite examples, again, is what happened to the poor people of Beth Semes when they brought back the Ark of the Covenant, you know, of movie fame. And this was what the background of this is, that the Philistines had captured the Ark of the Covenant, and they were pretty sorry that happened, because they had nothing but bad luck with this Ark. They thought, we've captured the Israelites' greatest treasure. Now we're going to have some fun. Didn't work out that way. It was a curse to them. And after 7 months of possession of this thing, they decided, hey, we better just give it back to these guys. It's not worth the trouble, okay? So they do that. Matter of fact, they don't just give back the Ark. They throw in some extras, 5 golden mice and 5 golden emerods, which are sort of like hemorrhoids. I guess this was sort of like, you know, the mascots of some of the Philistines. But so they give back the Ark to the Israelites. Now the Israelites are overjoyed, of course, to recover the Ark. I mean, it's the pride of their culture. What happens? They take this thing on like a victory tour. They're taking the Ark around. Everybody's happy. Everybody's rejoicing. Unfortunately, a few people in Beth Semes get a little too happy. They take a peek inside the Ark. Bad decision. The Lord kills 50,000 people for this small infraction of looking into the Ark. You know,
without telling them first that he's going to do that.
I guess they should have known. But if you want to check it out, it's in the first book of Samuel, chapter 6, verse 19.
Okay, well, Pat, the death of innocents has always posed a dilemma for religious people who are trying to put forth a just God. How do they explain this in the Old Testament?
Yeah, well, the Old Testament is just full of the death of innocents, unfortunately. And that presents sort of a dilemma for the people that are trying to explain or justify things in the Old Testament. You know, I mean, if you read the New Testament, there's relative to the Old Testament, there's a lot of soul searching, there's a lot of moralizing. But I mean, if you want action and violence, you got to go to the Old Testament. You know, I mean, people are just indiscriminately run over, killed. It doesn't make any difference who you are. The example I'm going to cite here is back to the book of Samuel, first book of Samuel, chapter 15, verse 3. And this is the Lord speaking. Now therefore go and smite Amalek, and utterly destroy all that he hath. Spare him not, nor covet anything that it is his, but slay both man and woman, child and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. So
it sounds like a few innocents there.
Total destruction, right. And now in the Bible, well, this Bible here, as a matter of fact, this large one, rather large one, they do have a footnote. Apparently, when the editors figured we need to at least explain why this is, because people are going to read this, and if you're like some people, they might not be, get too excited about the man and woman, but when you talk about killing innocent animals, that's going to get their attention and make them curious. So there's a footnote at the bottom of the page. It says, the great master of life and death, who cuts off one half of all mankind whilst they are children, I guess apparently referring to infant mortality, has been pleased to sometimes so ordain that children should be put to the sword in detestation of the crimes of their parents, and that they might not live to follow the same wicked ways. But without such ordinance of God, it is not allowable in any wars, however so just, to kill children. So what they're saying is, it's okay for God to do it. As long as you've got, direct instructions from God, you can kill children. Unfortunately, a lot of people seem to have received these instructions all the time. But, it does represent a sort of a weird mentality of the people that wrote this footnote. In the first place, they say they're killing everybody, including the children, so they don't follow the examples of their parents. Now, if the parents are dead, I don't think they're going to be leaving much of an example for the children to follow. So it still leaves the question, okay, the parents are evil, all of them are evil, which is doubtful, but why kill the children? It's almost like it sort of touches on genocide in a sense, and it also is a very strong indication of a certain almost racist notion that you can eliminate evil by eliminating a certain class or group of people. It's very disturbing, and you see this type of thing coming up, throughout history. Things like this happening and various justifications being presented. It's, the wiping out of entire communities like this is not unlike what happened in World War II, perpetrated by the Nazis. Another example, which offers slightly more humorous potential, if you can imagine that, is presented in the second book of Kings, verses 23 to 24. This is the destruction or murder, I guess you might use the term, of children by bears, if you can believe that. This was in, as Eliseus was leaving Bethel, some little boys came out of the city and mocked him, saying, "Go up, thou bald head, go up, thou bald head." Now, you might not think that that's very strong language, because I guess in my old neighborhood, it would have been something like, "Go head on, chrome dome," or something like that, But they said, "Go up, thou bald head." And looking back, he saw them and cursed them in the name of the Lord. And then came forth 2 bears out of the forest and tore of them 42 boys. So these kids mocked him, and he sicked a couple of bears on them. They ripped them limb from limb, 42 of them. That's a little severe, too.
I think it is, yes.
And the editors picked up on that. They thought that maybe they needed to explain this one a little bit, too. So the footnotes...
I would think so.
Let's hope so. I was horrified after reading that, but didn't make me feel too much better after I read the footnote. It says, Bethel was the seat of calf worship. They had trained up their children in prejudice against the true religion and its ministers. The boys insulted the religion by insulting the person of the prophet. So by making fun of this guy's lack of hair, they were insulting the religion, hence they deserved the ultimate penalty.
They deserved to die for that, yes.
They did die for that. And here again, we have echoes of genocide and Nazi atrocities, and we throw in a little child abuse to boot.
We've talked about sexism a little bit. We mentioned that earlier. Do you have any examples of that from the Old Testament?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of examples of sexism in the Old Testament, You could just go on and on. The basic culture had very, very structured ideas about what the role of women was and what the worth of women was in the society. But women were often the victims of very harsh violence, since that's sort of what we're talking about tonight. The example here I'd like to regale you with is from Judges chapter 19. They were, this is a sort of an interesting story because it combines several elements. Now, the Hebrew tribes had to go through extraordinary lengths to avoid exterminating one of the other tribes, the Benjaminites, by giving them their women. What happened was somebody was traveling through in Gibeah, I believe, if I can read my notes here. I'm not very up on the names of the towns in the Holy Land, but he was a Levite, one of the tribes of Israel. And a group of, and his wife, his concubine or wife, sometimes there's, it's a little hard to understand exactly what they mean by concubine, was gang raped by a group of people, of Benjaminites, okay? As a result of this, there erupted a civil war because the offenders wouldn't surrender the guilty party among them. So the other tribes made war against the Benjaminites. What happened? Actually, the way this happened was that the husband, usually when a woman is raped or murdered, the actual victim in these stories turns out to be the husband somehow. He's the person that really suffers, you would believe when reading the story. But he summoned the other tribes and expressed his indignation by chopping up the body of his murdered wife and, I guess, mailing it out to the various tribes to incite them. They all got together and promised Yahweh to never give their daughters to any Benjaminites for marriage. Now then they proceeded to wage war against the Benjaminites. They slaughtered all but 600 men. I mean, everybody but 600 men, including women and children, unfortunately, as this usually goes. But then they had second thoughts. They said, well, gee, the Benjaminites, I mean, they're one of the tribes. We can't get rid of them. They thought this would be something sort of an irreversible injustice to kill all the Benjaminites, which it was. It would have been. Unfortunately, they don't realize this earlier on in the story or throughout the rest of the Bible that they really shouldn't go around slaughtering entire peoples. But they came up with, they hatched a scheme is what happened. They came up with the idea that they could not kill the Benjaminites, but they killed all the women, so they were going to have to provide them with some substitute wives so that the Benjaminites could propagate their tribe. Now, what they did was they had some other women from the town of Jabez Galad, I think is how you pronounce it. Unfortunately, when they made this, they still had this issue of the vow that they made to Yahweh standing in the way. They couldn't just give their daughters because they said they couldn't. But the people from this one particular town hadn't been in on this. They didn't make the vow not to surrender their daughters. So what they did is they decided that they would go and kill all the people in this town except for the virgins. The value of virginity really paid off in this case. So they went and killed all the people in the town, scooped up the virgins, took them out and offered them to the Benjaminites and sort of told them, hey, okay, guys, all's forgiven. If you want these women, we're not going to really give them to you, but they're going to participate in this dance, and you can sort of swoop down and take them off for your wives. And, that's a case where you have, initially it starts out with a gang rape.
Yeah.
Then you go to warfare, genocide, if you will, and you conclude with what amounts to a mass rape. So
It sounds like it really got out of hand.
yeah, it was sort of a strange situation.
Yes, it really.
Rather bizarre, but I mean, it's related in the Bible as if, it's all in a day's work.
This sort of thing happens all the time, right?
But speaking of genocide, there were some really favorite targets in the Bible. Certain people seem to get wiped out over and over again. It's sort of like watching a Western. The Amalekites, for instance, Amalekites, pardon me, I have problems with these names, but they were wiped out wiped out by Saul in first book of Samuel, chapter 15, verses 7 through 8, and by David in chapter 17, verse 27. They were wiped out again in chapter 30, except for 400 young men who escaped on camels.
Okay.
And they were also exterminated for the last time in the days of Hezekiah. So I guess they, altogether they were wiped out about 4 times. The Edomites were done in twice, and once in the first book of Kings, chapter 11, verse 16, and again in the second book of Kings, chapter 8, verses 22. So these guys couldn't catch a break any kind of way. But one more example. I'd like to
Okay,
give
one
you
more
here.
example.
This is another good one. This is an example of killing women and children and saving the men. So they sort of, you know, it seems like they always killed the men, quite often killed the women, children, and the men. In other words, everybody. Sometimes they killed their animals too. This is a case where they killed not the men, but the women and the children. Now this is in Ezekiel chapter 9, verse 4. And the Lord said to him, "Go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and mark Tau, T-H-A-U, upon the foreheads of men that sigh and mourn for all the abominations that are committed in the midst thereof." Verse 5, and to the others he said in my hearing, "Go yes after him through the city, and strike, let your eye not spare, nor ye be moved with pity." And verse 6, "Utterly destroy old and young, maidens, children, and women, but upon whomsoever you shall see Tau, kill him not, and begin ye at my sanctuary." So what they're going, now Tau is this cruciform Hebrew character. He's telling these guys to go out and, you know, if you approve of somebody's behavior, mark their forehead. Then he's sending the second wave in, and he's telling them to kill. Now he specifically says men, mark the men, okay? And then he tells the second wave to go in and kill everybody that doesn't have this mark. So in that case, all of the women and children are going to get hit. Some of the men, if they're fortunate enough, or if they catch on, maybe they can put it on their forehead themselves, are going to be spared. The only disappointment is that they leave out the asses and the goats and all the other animals that sometime are commanded to die in these mass assaults.
So this hardly would be examples of things to base our life on today, although history is full of this sort of thing.
Well, it's not something to base your life on, but it is, like I say, entertaining storytelling. You know, you can go through the Bible, throughout the Bible, and find things that are incredible, are unbelievable, are astounding. Good literature. But, you know, they do stretch credibility to the limit. And they also make you wonder what kind of God the people had in mind when they were writing this. Samson, you know, excellent source of material for movie makers. I mean, he kills, I wish I had the numbers with me, but literally hundreds of his enemies with the skull of an ass. And when he's finished, he's all tired out. He's dry, he's parched. So he's refreshed with water that magically springs forth from the jaw. And that way he's refreshed, he can make his escape. Now one has to wonder why, if he can, perform the superhuman feat of killing all the enemy armed with only the skull of an ass, or was it the jaw of an ass? Well, some, portion of an ass's skull. Why did he, why was he tired when he was finished? One could expect it, but not after, if it's such a miraculous feat, why didn't the Lord just give him a little extra burst of energy? Why couldn't he have somehow restored the proper body chemistry without resorting to something as spectacular as a spring bursting forth from the skull? It makes for a much better story. That's about the only thing you can say. It's really, that's really the essence of the Bible, is good literature, telling a good story, and grabbing the attention of the readers.
Well, they've certainly based a lot of good movies on these Old Testament stories. But one thing that bothers me is the theme of vengeance through all this. This was a very vengeful God in the Old Testament, and he got terribly, terribly upset about some of the smallest things, as you have mentioned. And this is something that people base their lives on. Vengeance is very much with us today, and probably very much based on the Old Testament example of vengeance.
Yeah, it is, really. The thing is, as I pointed out in certain of these examples, the vengeance wasn't just visited upon the actual perpetrator of whatever offense that happened to be in dispute at the moment. It was carried upon, you know, his children, often for generations. I mean, you know, there's an example of God causing the son of what? Once again, I can't remember the name, but causing the son to fall sick and die because of the sins of the father. Now, it seems that, but it is not inconsistent with the culture, because once again, they consider inheritance to be a very important thing. The family honor, the aspects of, you know, what your forebears did, your ancestry, all these things are very important. So looking at the world in that light, it's somewhat understandable for them to write stories about children being punished for the sins of their fathers, and that's one of the whole central problems, I guess, about Christianity, the concept of original sin, the concept, pardon me, of people for generations paying for a sin committed by one of the ancestors. It's something that, unfortunately, as you mentioned, still has an impact in today's society, but I guess that's one thing that we try to do when we talk about the Bible, talk about the stories. We try to put these things in perspective, help people understand what's going on. It's really true that rationalist freethinkers are students of the Bible, and they study it for a good reason, because they want to understand the culture, the history, the philosophy that underlies the Bible. There's nothing wrong with it.
There's a great deal of information in it, of course. But when they start believing every word is literally true and take it out of that historical literary context, it starts being a real burden on people.
Well, it certainly is, and you see it today. The violence that you find in the Bible is even today being replicated in the Middle East and all over the world, really. I mean, I'm not just blaming the Bible for the existence of violence. It obviously would exist even if there weren't.
Yeah, it existed before the Bible, and of course.
But it would be helpful to remove as many rationalizations for the use of violence as we possibly could. Unfortunately, a lot of people are turning to the Bible, turning to concepts of chosen people, this is my land, to justify violence. It all springs from that heritage.
So, well, Pat, it's been very interesting having you here today and learning more about the Bible and your interesting examples. And I'd like to thank our viewers for being with us today. If they have any comments or questions, we'd like them to write to us at the Rationalist Society of St. Louis, Post Office Box 2931, St. Louis, Missouri, 63130.